Next up, we have Mr. Brad Urani, come all the way from San Francisco? Santa Barbara, California. We all know Santa Barbara, right? It was the only thing worth watching on TV like back in the 90s. So Brad's going to talk about command line interfaces in Ruby. But before that, I'd like to, once he's done. So, welcome, Brad.
Thank you.
To RubyConf India. First time in India?
My very first time.
Very nice.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Brad got in super late last night, so thank you for going through all of this to give us the talk. You're originally from St. Louis, but you live now in Santa Barbara.
Yes.
And you work with Procorp. What does Procorp do?
Procorp makes software for the construction industry. I have some slides. I'll show you some slides.
So you're the builder's builder.
We're the builder's builder. We build the software that builds the world, and that's what we say.
Nice, nice. So I'm going to just let Brad take it away from here. Take it away, Brad.
Thank you. Hi, how's everyone doing? This is my first time in India. Thank you so much, all the conference organizers, everyone for having me. Like he said, I got in at 4 in the morning last night, and I haven't slept. I'm completely exhausted. Normally, I would tell some funny joke about something I saw in India, ha ha ha, but I'm too tired to think of one, so just pretend I said a joke. This is a talk about command line, about hacking your command line, changing it to make you more productive, about learning how to use your shell. My name is Brad. This is a photo of me. When you do a lot of conference speaking and social media, you get afraid to change your photo because you're afraid people are going to forget who you are. It's about 15 years old, but I was in better shape back then, so I'm just going to leave it. As he said, I work at Procorp in beautiful, sunny Carpinteria, California. It's near Santa Barbara. It's a beautiful little beach town on the Pacific Ocean. We sponsor a lot of Rails events. We were the diamond sponsor for several recent Rails Confs and Ruby Confs, so we really love the Ruby community. We build software for the construction industry. If you build a skyscraper, a shopping mall, a train station, you probably use our software to sort of manage everything. Here is one of our iPad apps for drawing management. And we have one of the world's largest Rails apps. It is over 1 million lines of Ruby. It was started in 2005, before Rails even hit 1.0. We are a real Ruby success story. We love Ruby, and because we love Ruby so much, we're always looking for ways to make our developers more productive and help them with their workflows, and that's one of the things that inspired me to do this talk. Along with Ruby, we also have a lot of this kind of stuff. So these are various Devops tools and systems management tools and infrastructure tools. And what they have in common is that most of these are command line-based, Linux-based tools. And I have to be honest, I am mostly a web developer. My background is mostly in web development, full-stack web development. And when I started this job, I was not very good at these things. I'm still not great, but I'm a lot better than I was at using these sort of command line-based infrastructure tools. So what happened? What changed that made me feel more competent in these? Because here I am in 2013. I started on Windows. And then here I am in 2018, command line everything. I have completely changed my workflow it's Vim-based. I never leave my terminal unless I need to use my browser. I don't use IDEs anymore. What changed is that I got into dot files. Dot files are what I'm going to talk about today. Dot files are what you use to configure your system, to configure your shell, to configure your editor, to configure all the little tools you use to change them, to make them better, to make them more productive, more powerful. So this is mostly like a lighthearted talk about tooling and hacking your shell, but it carries a serious message. And the message is, if you get really good at your shell and you feel really comfortable in a Linux environment, you will be less intimidated if some point in the future you have to go and use this kind of stuff. I say that dot files are the gateway drug to ops. You start learning these things, and all of a sudden, these kind of ops tools don't feel so difficult or intimidating if you're really comfortable with your shell environment. So what are dot files? Dot files are files in your home directory that start with a dot. That simple. Hidden files in your home directory, and with them you can configure a whole host of things. Ruby, Docker, Vim, Tmux, pSQL, all of those things can be configured with a dot file. You'll notice that mine are symlinks. A lot of mine are symlinks. More on that later. But if you start hacking your dot files, I want to give you a warning. You will break everything at some point. At work. And it will be embarrassing. You'll probably be pair programming with someone and you can't CD into a directory or you can't launch Rails because you were hacking your dot files and you messed something up and you broke something. But I'll tell you what, that is the goal. Even though that will be embarrassing, that is the goal. If you're like me, you learn most by hacking and breaking things. I also like to read books. I like to do online courses. I like to watch conference talks. But most of the things I learned are by hacking and breaking things. And that's what dot files encourages you to do. But you will fix it. And if fixing it, you will have learned something new about your environment, about your shell, and you will become a more productive, better developer. And this does get addictive. This is an actual photo of me in 2015 when I first got addicted to dot files. I flew home to visit my family on Christmas, and instead of spending time with my family, I spent the whole time on my Vim RC, ignoring all my friends and family. I polished off a bottle of wine. Santa saw my Vim RC and started to help me and got drunk with me, and we both passed out by the Christmas tree. So this will get addictive, but let's jump right in. The first thing we're going to hack here is our shell. This is a shell. I call him Larry. I don't know why. I just think he looks like a Larry. I'm a shell. I'm cool. Just a quick point of clarification. When you open something like iTerm or GNOME terminal, right, you are opening a terminal. A terminal emulates hardware. The program that runs inside it is a shell. And you do not have to stick with the default shell, right? If you have Mac OS or most Linux distributions, the shell that ships with it when you open up a shell is bash. And bash is good, bash is reliable, bash is the standard, bash is a little boring, to be quite honest. And you don't have to stick with that. You can change it to something else, such as Z-shell. Z-shell looks a lot like bash, but it's a little better. It's got some more really kind of cool extra little tricks it does. It has just slightly better, for instance, autocomplete. I can do something like this, and it will autocomplete. Do you see what I did there? I typed -S, -I, and I hit tab, and it fills that in. Do I need to make that bigger? Give me a second. There we go. See at the bottom? It just has it has little tricks, little things you can do. It has better coloring, I found. It has better globbing. It's close enough to bash where it won't confuse you if you're a bash user or if you have to use a server that uses bash. But it's got a lot of little extras and hidden things that just make it a nicer dev experience. So what I do is I switch mine, and I only use Z-shell. There are some other ones that are even fancier. There's corn shell and fish shell. These are shells from the 90s that kind of have visual menus and things like that. I find them a little too crazy, but your mileage may vary. You may like it. But the point being is you can pick your shell. You don't have to stick with bash, or you can if you like bash and you don't want to. You have a choice. And of course, you can modify it. You can modify your Z shell or your bash or whatever shell you use with a dot file. So if you go and edit a file called .zshrc, you can add things like, for instance, shell aliases. So like this one here, it makes a new shell command called an alias called BE, which just stands for bundle exec. And then where you can type BE Rails server, and it will run bundle exec Rails server. And let's see, that used to be 12 characters. Now it's 2. I just made you 6 times more productive. You all deserve a raise. Or taking this further, right? Bundle exec Rails S, you can just type BERS and save yourself all the extra typing and make your workflow just a little tighter, just a little faster. Here's a fun one. In Bash or Zush, you can define functions. So I made one called MCD. MCD, all it does is it creates a new directory and it switches into that directory. So if I MCD foo, whoops, wait, it already exists. Sorry, I'm not even going to demo it, but trust me. It makes the new directory, and then it CDs right into that directory already, so you don't have to make dir and then CD. It's just a little bit of an improvement. It's just a little function that makes you a little faster, a little more agile in your workflow. Here's one of my favorites. It's a function called G. There's a little if statement here. What this says is if you don't pass any args, run get status. If you pass an arg, run get followed by whatever you typed. So for example, source. I'm just going to go into a directory. Fractal Banana is my blog. But if I just type G, I get G status. If I type G followed by a command, it runs that command. It saves me a few extra characters, makes me just a little bit faster, makes my developer experience just a little bit better. Here's a fun one. It's a function called man. Look at the last line. Man, it calls the command, the function man calls the command man. Man, as we know, opens up the manual pages, right? You can see the manual for your program. Then there's all this less term cap stuff. I have no idea what this does. I copied this from someone else's dot files. More on that later. But what it does is something really nice, which is just simply give you colored man pages. A little more readable. Cool. Okay. Let's talk about our prompts. Does anyone have a prompt that looks like this? That's pretty boring, isn't it? I think we can do better. We could improve it by showing the Git branch, maybe? Ooh, how about unstaged and staged commits? And what if we even diff it with the origin? Bow, bow, bow. Here's my prompt. What do we have here? The current directory, the current branch we're on, the number of commits behind origin master. Someone else has pushed to master since I've pulled this. The number of commits ahead, the number of commits I have that are not on master, staged changes that I have used git add to add, and unstaged changes. Nice. This is actually a really, really useful prompt now, too. It took me days and days and days to write the script that does this. Just kidding. It's something freely available on GitHub. I didn't write it at all. You can download it. There are instructions. You can install it. It takes about 5 minutes. There's Zish git prompt, and if you use bash, there's also a bash git prompt, and it's really smart. It does things like caching and background fetching, and it has a timeout because it has to talk to the server. So it's a good one. Don't try to write your own. Just use this one. Here's another one of my favorite shell tools, which is a little tool called FZF. FZF, does anyone know this one? FZF is a fuzzy finding tool. It's kind of like grep, except it does a fuzzy search, but it also has some shell built-ins. So I can do things like, oh, look at all my recent shell commands. This is the one that doesn't work, of course. Oh, that time it worked. Look at all my shell commands, and I can do them over again. I can get a list of all the files in the current directory, right? So maybe if I want to cat one of them, I can do it like that. Let me go back to where I was. It also has a Vim plugin, so if you are a Vim user, you can use it to quickly find files in your directory in a way that's much faster than the built-in Vim things. All right, quitting Vim, that's the old joke, right? Whew, okay. So that's a tool that I really love that just improves my shell experience and makes everything a little bit slicker. And while we're on it, let's talk about, and it's freely available on GitHub. You can download it, you can install it very quickly. It takes just a few minutes. But while we're on the subject of Vim, I want to talk about Vim. This is not a Vim talk. I could give a whole talk on Vim. Vim is this old text editor that runs in the command line, right? It's from the 90s. There are 3 phases to learning Vim if you decide to go on that. There is suffering. You will hate it. You will not be able to do anything. Your life will be terrible. There is Stockholm Syndrome. This is when you are held captive and you start to sympathize with your captors and you start to think they are good people even though they are terrible and treating you horribly. And the final is the sunk cost fallacy. This is when you forget how much pain you went through and how much trouble you had and you think it was a good idea all along. It's kind of like, has anyone ever told you, like, you should have children? The only reason someone who has children will tell you to have children is because they have forgotten all the effort it took to get there and all the effort it took. It's the same reason someone would recommend you to use Vim. But your mileage may vary. You may like it. But with this becomes, if you do learn a little bit of Vim, it becomes really useful because Vim on your dev machine or your laptop leads to Vim on the server. And you would be surprised at all the places this pops up and all the places this becomes really useful. Did you know that in pSQL you can type \E and open Vim and write your SQL query in Vim and then quit and it will run the query in pSQL? Did you know that you can run Vim inside pry or IRB? If you type edit, you can type your Ruby commands in Vim and then exit out and it will run them in pry. Did you know that you can use Vim shortcuts in less or man or something like things like that? Did you know that you can use Vim search commands and Vim shortcuts in tmux? So if you start to learn a little about this, these skills kind of spread and you can start to use them in other places that you may not have known about. And I will say that being competent, that someday, you know, if you get into ops, you're going to have to edit a file on the server. And knowing a little Vim goes a long way and makes you comfortable editing that file on that server if you're already kind of good at it. So then we have Git. Who here is a Git user? I'm just kidding. You're all Git users. I hope you're not using anything other than Git. Git is very modifiable. There's a file called, what the hell is it called? .git, right? You put that in your home directory, and you can put stuff like this, and you can completely change your Git experience. You can add aliases, you can change colors, you can change default behaviors. For instance, I put this little alias in there, DFOM, and it just calls git diff origin master -- color, which gives me a nice little experience. Remember my G command, right? It comes with it. And that saves me some typing, and it saves me from having to remember longer Git commands. Here's a fun one, git lg. It's got all this, it calls git log, but with all this color, graph, formatting stuff, which gives you a pretty neat little thing, which just looks like this. Here's a visual representation of commits, and if I go down far enough, it actually has a visual representation of the DAG, of the directed acyclic graph in Vim, so that you can kind of get a visual of the sort of commit tree or the commit graph. Git supports this cool thing called hooks. Hooks are, they give you the ability to fire off a script when certain actions are taken. When you make a commit, you can fire off a script before you push, after you push, before you commit, after you commit, and various others. And that allows some really neat things. For instance, I have a Git hook that looks like this. Everyone got that? Okay. And that allows me to do this. Has anyone ever accidentally pushed to master? Yeah, I thought so. Yeah. Some of you have, and you're not raising your hand, I'm pretty sure. This is what it looks like when I do it. Ah, ding, ding, ding. I have a cow that asks me if I'm sure that I want to do that. I'm pretty sure this cow was outside my hotel room this morning. I've been told that's auspicious. Is that right? Cool. So I could say no. So let's talk about Ruby. Ruby can be customized a little bit. These three files will do some changes to how Ruby and Rails and RSpec work on your system. There's a gemrc file which you can add to --no document, and this will not download the documentation for your gems and make the installs faster and everything. Really important on your servers. If you're running if you're downloading gems through bundler directly through gem, add this to the dot files on your server, and it'll go much faster. It won't have to download all the docs with every gem. In RSpec, you can have it automatically colorize things, and you can automatically change the order to run randomly, which you want, right? Every time you run RSpec, put that in your home directory in a .rspec, and it will have that behavior for every directory you have. In Rails, you can set defaults so that every time you run Rails new, you get, for instance, Postgres instead of MySQL. Skip turbolinks. It's a weird feature. I don't like it. Skip test unit, right? Maybe you want to use RSpec or something like that. But really the most interesting, I think, in the Ruby ecosystem is Pry. Do we have any Pry users? Yeah, Pry is a cool tool, and you can really do some cool things with Pry in your dot files. If you make a file called .pryrc, you could put any Ruby you want in there, and it will run anytime you open a shell. Anytime you open a Pry shell, right? So for instance, if you have a gem called AwesomePrint installed on your system, gives you much better output in your Pry session. So for instance, if you have an array, it splits it on 2 lines like that, right? And colorizes it and makes it a little more readable. That's kind of neat. Factory Girl, actually it's now Factory Bot. Does anyone use this to make database test models and stuff? Have you ever wished that you could just like use create or build in your shell? Add this, and then all of a sudden you can. You can create models right in your Pry shell. It includes it requires all the gems and things like that. It allows you to reuse those things for testing. This one makes a function called SQL, where if you just want to pass raw SQL through Active Record directly to your database, you just type SQL, quote, select star from, and whoosh, you can just run SQL straight from Pry. We found all kinds of cool dot files. We have now modified our shell. We've changed our shell. We've created all kinds of aliases, shortcuts. We've changed the behavior of all kinds of things. Many things that I didn't even mention you can change. You can completely change the way your pSQL looks. You can change the prompt. If you're a Vim user, there's all kinds of shortcuts and things you add. If you use tmux, you could totally change the way tmux works. You could change the colors. You can change the key commands. But you do all this work. We change all these dot files. We have worked and worked and worked and worked to make this really awesome, great environment. Now we need to save this somewhere, right? We want it in a repo so that we can reuse it, so we can install it on other machines, and so we can share it. So we want this in GitHub. So what we do is we make a repo called .files, and everyone I know names the repo exactly that, DOTFILES, .files. Mine looks like this, and inside here are all my .files and all the customizations I've made. And this is a public repo, by the way, so that any of you can look at my .files and see what I've done and copy and paste as many of them as you want. And then what we need is to install them, right? So we have this repo on our system in our source directory. What we need to do is get the dot files from the repo into our home directory. So what you do is you write a script that symlinks the files from the repo into your home directory. We don't put our dot files directly in the home directory. We symlink them from the home directory to where the files live in the source directory. And there are a few ways we can do this. I use a little program. It's called RCM. It's by the fine folks at Thoughtbot. You can brew install or apt-get install RCM, and it just has a few commands that will find the directory with your dot files and then symlink all the files into your home directory. There are Ruby gems that do it if you're a Ruby person. And then you could also just write your own little bash script that symlinks your dot files, right? Here's an example of one. I found this on Jess Frizzell's dot files. She's a dev evangelist for Microsoft. She's got really awesome dot files, and I found her little script right there. So it's pretty simple. All we're doing is looping through our dot files directory and symlinking them into our home directory, restart our shell, and boom, you've got your own customized environment. And this is kind of cool. We can look at other people's dot files and see what fun things that they have. So I met Jason Sweat today. Jason, where are you? I found your dot files, ha ha ha. Let's see what's in Jason's dot files. Oh, he's got some cool little aliases, right? He does Git a little different from me. He uses shell aliases instead of Git aliases to improve his workflow. This one's kind of cool down here, ppwd, which we can see it calls pwd, which shows our current working directory, and it pipes it into ppcopy. ppcopy on macOS copies it to our clipboard, so we can paste it somewhere else. So that's cool. From any shell, just type ppwd, and then you've got the current directory, and you can go paste it maybe in another tmux pane or in another terminal or something like that. Useful little things here. This is one I found. I found this in Sam Phippin's dot files. This is kind of cool. It's a pry thing where you can call object. It patches. What it does is it patches object. So on any object, you can do object.ri, and you can get the documentation. This is, for instance, showing the documentation for objects, right? Or you could do something like this. Standard error. Right? And get the documentation for standard error, or even methods. Method. And there we have, let's scroll up, the documentation for toString right there. So that's kind of cool. To be honest, I don't use this. I just go to Google when I want to find something, but you may like this. You may find that having your docs in your shell is a useful productivity enhancement for you. And then you get this question, to fork or not to fork. If you really quickly want to have a really awesome set of dot files, you can go out there, find a Git repo from someone who already has them. You can fork it. Then it is yours, and you can keep it as it is, or you can make changes and just start off. You find someone who's got good dot files, fork it, now they're yours, and you have a really great set of dot files with hardly doing any work. This is good if you just want to get started and get productive fast, and you're not that interested in how they work. But it does kind of detract from the experience. In my opinion, one of the cool parts about doing this is doing some of it yourself and learning how they work. You know, making your own dot files so that you are forced to learn all the lessons and break things and fix things along the way. So whichever way you want it. There are repos out there that just have links to other awesome dot files, right? Here's a good one if you're looking for dot files to fork. You can see mine as a fork from the thoughtbot.files, right? Thoughtbot has this legendary set of dot files. They're very complex, very complicated. I don't know if I would start with this because they're so complicated if you're a beginner. It might be a little too much. This is like graduate level dot files. On the other hand, if you just want the best dot files there are, fork the thoughtbot.files, and there you go. When I did it, first I made my own. I learned all those lessons there. Then eventually I switched over to the dot files. I forked the thoughtbot.files, and that's worked really well for me. Okay. Oh, quick note, don't check in any secrets, right? So don't put like private keys in there. Probably don't even put like names of your servers, like your internal company servers or things like that, right? You can keep those. You can have another file with your secrets, and you can git ignore it, and you can git ignore it and keep it in your .files directory so that it doesn't get pushed to GitHub. Remember, we're putting our .files in a public repo. That's the fun part of this, is that allows you to share. So go experiment, go break things, go hack your shell, add aliases, get better at these tools. You will be surprised. Not only is this a wonderful productivity thing to do, it's a social activity. It allows you to find other people with similar .files and trade them and trade copy-paste on GitHub. And you will find that being a confident shell developer, that being really comfortable in Linux environments and being familiar with how shells work, how the different programs installed on there, whether it's Vim or Tmux or anything else, will drastically improve your confidence when it comes to servers and ops and everything else. Few resources. I will tweet the links to this slide, so if you want to find these links, just follow me on Twitter. I'm Brad Urani. I work in Santa Barbara, California. Hit me up on Twitter, hit me up on LinkedIn, and I will be at the party tonight at the reception. Come and find me if you want to talk .files. Thank you.
In fact, we have time for questions.
Yeah, sure.
So you don't need to wait for the party to hit Brad up with some of your questions. So do we have any questions?
Yes.
Hi, Brad.
Hi.
I just wanted to add that MCD function that you added. So there's a function in ZSH named take, T-A-K-E, which does exactly the same thing.
Oh. Well, don't do what I said then. Oh, good to know. Thanks.
Yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Anyone else? Wasn't there someone over here? Okay.
Cool. So never underestimate what a good command line knowledge can do for your career. I was working in a bank way back when, and I was about to get fired because nobody wanted me in the team. And I joined this group, like I was doing a rotation, and I joined this group where we used to build these cash flows. Like there was a cash flow modeling engine, and it was running on a Unix server. And my boss, like he was checking out some of those cash flows, and he'd say like more and the file name, and he'd go like space, space, space to the end of the file because he was basically interested in the total of the cash flows that were coming in that file. So I say to him, why don't you just say tail and the name of the file instead of saying more? So he does tail and the name of the file and shows the last 10 lines. He looks at me and says, you're hired. And that damaged my career terribly because I then spent the next 5 years of my life as a banker. So it could go either way. Thanks, Brad, for a fantastic talk. Very enthusiastically delivered and at a breakneck speed.